and is home to Métis and many diverse Aboriginal persons. We honour the connection to the land and the rivers and respect the importance of the environment to our strength as a community. And with that, I'd like to ask if there are any late items. Councillor Woodward has one.
Yes.
And that's good. Just to indicate what it is, let us know what it is.
Yep, Councillor.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about RDCKA remunerations and
Okay,
stipends.
thank you. And I've got one hopefully a letter endorsed by council to send off to the Minister responsible for Environment Protection and Sustainability, the Department of Fisheries and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans.
So we need a resolution
To-
approve those.
So to take those two late items, Councillor Charlwood, Councillor Lochtenberg, all in favour? Thank you. Okay, adoption of the minutes of the previous meeting of September. Oh, sorry, adoption of the agenda. Mover and seconder, please. Councillor Page and Councillor Lochtenberg, all in favour? Carried, thank you. Okay, adoption of the minutes of the previous meeting, the regular meeting of September the 7th, 2021.
Move.
Councillor Morrison, Councillor Lochtenberg, all in favour? Carried. Recommendations from the Committee of the Whole meeting, request, delegations, on to bylaws number 9. Council Procedure Amendment Bylaw number 3534, 2021. Okay. And with that, Council Procedure Bylaw number 3534, 2021 passed the first of 3 readings of the amended bylaw, and the preamble is in front of council, and there's a recommendation here that if council wishes to endorse it, we can move forward with this bylaw.
I'll move the
Councillor-
recommendation.
Renwick and Councillor Morrison seconded. Any questions or comments? And the recommendation is that Council Procedure Bylaw number 3534, 2021 be read a first and second time by title only. All in
Do you want-
favor? Did you want to speak? Sorry.
Well, I thought maybe just for the benefit of the public, staff would just give us an overview of what changes have been proposed here.
You want to? Okay. Sarah?
You.
Want to do it, sorry.
Sarah, you're the
Go
staff.
ahead. Okay.
So there have been a couple of, one change to the procedure bylaw, and that is to allow council to hold electronic meetings. Currently, MO Ministerial Order 192 has expired. It expired at the end of September, which gave council the authority to hold electronic meetings or virtual meetings throughout the pandemic. But that order has expired, and so now many councils are amending their procedure bylaws to allow or to have some language for councils to hold electronic meetings. In our case, we are suggesting that electronic meetings be authorized when there is a provincial state of emergency or a local state of emergency declared. And that means that, for example, if there was a wildfire and we couldn't get into the building, council could log into a meeting anywhere and we would stream it live and run it virtually, and you have the authority to do that. Currently, we do have the authority to have electronic participation at meetings, which means that up to 2 members of council can join virtually. And if there's a resolution of council, more can participate electronically. But the presiding officer, which is the mayor at this point, and a municipal officer must be in chambers for the meeting. So essentially, the change is around the holding of electronic meetings.
Okay, everybody clear?
Thank
Any
you.
questions? Hearing none, all in favour? Thank you, Sarah. And
I'll
number
move
2,
third
the
reading.
Sorry,
I'll move third reading.
by Councillor Morrison, second by Councillor Renwick. All in favour? Carried, thanks very much. So we're seeing a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel here for more open opportunities for meetings and so forth, so. Okay, next on the list is the bylaw number 3535, 2021, and that is the City of Nelson Permissive Tax Exemption Bylaw. As a result of constant deliberations on the permissive tax exemption applications, council is now requested to pass the first of three readings of the permissive tax exemption bylaw number 3535, 2021. And once again, we had a number of meetings around the permissive tax exemption. There's this full staff report attached, and there is 2 recommendations to move this forward. Moved by Councillor Leuchtenberg and seconded by Councillor Renwick, that the permissive tax exemption bylaw number 3535, 2021 be introduced and read a first and second time by title only. And Colin, do you want to give us a little bit of an update, my friend?
Thanks, Mayor Dooley. Yes, in fact, just letting the public know, we did meet a number of times. We had some workshops, one back in May where we went over the policy. And the reason that we had that workshop was out of our normal plan, we usually provide a 4-year permissive tax exemption to those that apply, or council deliberates and decides. And last year, there was questions about a few of the properties. They were being in the construction phase, mostly social housing for 3 large buildings going on. And there was a lot of question marks about what their value would be, and a lot of unknowns as far as what kind of breaks they may get from the provincial government. In addition, there was an overall question about some of the parameters in the policy that this council wanted to take a look at. So we had that workshop, and they decided that they liked the soft cap of about 0.5% of a tax percentage would be allowed to as a guideline for what permissive tax exemptions would be provided to these great organizations in our community that provide great service. They also looked through a number of the policy mandates, whether or not they be on housing or the fact that they have to be inclusive, and made a few small adjustments there. When council got the applications in, it was a very large package. They did go through the package. We did, as staff, bring up a number of points, one in particular being about Granite Point Golf Course and where it's at with its plans. And so right now we know that they've been given here on this particular bylaw a 1-year exemption. So we will look at them in a year from now, which is different from the others that got a 3-year. And part of that is just because they're looking at a change in structure, and council has to be aware of when it starts to get into a place of a development that's doesn't really fit the mandate and the policy providing a permissive tax exemption for a group that is starting to build and being in a for-profit manner. On the other side was we did have 3 large social development properties, which the council is very pleased to see and be part of. Now, in working with those groups over the last months, there was an understanding that they had applied for Class 3, which is a council order that comes from the province that will designate a portion of the property or the whole property at a valuation of $1 for land and $1 for the building itself. So with a value of $2, there would be no need for a permissive tax given because the provincial government has done that. Certainly that is something that we found out in getting the draft law numbers for the 3 properties, whether or not they be the 205 Hall Street, the Lakeside property down by Dairy Queen, or the other property being Reimer's Place. What we do know is that there has been a significant decrease in what the value of these properties would be if you were thinking about it on a market basis. So they're in the about approximately $3 million for the 205 and the Lakeside properties, Nelson Cares properties, because of the limits on what kind of rent can be applied. So that is what BC Assessment uses when they're trying to determine a value. And when I say that at $3 million, their market value would be upwards of 8 to 10. And so you could see already for council, they were like, well, they've gotten, almost, in some places a 70% break from taxes as it is. And so that was one reason that they did not include them. And then the other property for Reimer's Place, with the fact that it had been handed over, the land and the building is now in the ownership of the BC Housing Corp. And because it's a provincial corporation, it actually does not qualify for getting a permissive tax exemption. And in fact, they will be taxed on a grant in lieu. So council has taken some of this information, and their goal for 2020 budget is to look at what might have been a tax savings and or tax that we were going to get that we didn't expect, and looking at trying to put that into a potential sustainability fund or some other manner that they can use in a way to assist housing projects, others that they may see, not just totally delineated on that, and then that'll allow them to, I think, be proactive in helping other buildings that may need some support. Otherwise, when you look at the rest of the list, it's the same groups that applied last year, all good organizations in the city, and through council's reading of a very large package, they came to the conclusion that they were comfortable with providing this group a 3-year tax break, other than, like I said, the Granite Golf Course, which has got a 1 year.
Thank you very much.
If there's one other thing, Mayor, that I just wanted to think, because I think I may have confused a bit of council, and I just wanted to clarify one thing in regards to when we provide a permissive tax exemption. Not only does that mean that the property becomes non-taxable for municipal taxes, but it means all the other taxes, whether they're hospital, school district, regional district, all also are forgiven. Now, the one thing is that the city then, when they find out what their taxation is, they kind of work with their budget is within that number. Whereas, for example, if you had 10 taxpayers that were each paying $100 at the time for example, for the RDCK, if they provided us a requisition saying we're collecting $1,000 from the City of Nelson residents, and there were 10 owners and they all paid $100, and then we gave one an exemption, it's not like we are now cutting them a check for $900. They still have asked for $1,000, so we give them $1,000. Therefore, each of the other groups would have to pay, now instead of $100, they'd pay $110. So to be able to get to that place where they would then cover the cost of the one that got the tax exemption. So a little bit different, and just wanted to be clear on that, so that it's not that when we provide that tax exemption, that the rest of the other taxpayers from, like I said, hospital or regional district, they have a requisition. They say, you have to give us this amount. It's not like where you have no taxes, therefore you don't get the tax, so then you live within that. So just a kind of a clarity thing. It
They
does
still
just show
require
that.
their portion.
They still get their portion, 100%.
Councillor Lockenberg.
Just on that, you said for clarification, I recommend we do that again and explain it just one more time.
Okay, sure.
To make it even more clear.
Okay, I
Because,
can.
Because I think I had Janice, thankfully, call with Janice today. She sort of ran through some of this, and then to hear that, I could still imagine people could use one more.
Fair
Good
enough.
example, though. Better than the one I gave you today.
Fair enough. Well, it's a simple example, but it's just to try to play a part. For example, if we give a tax exemption, same as $1,000, we would now just collect $900. We would then have to, think about cutting back our budget, other revenues, or, you could have to have a tax increase to be able to match if you wanted to get to that $1,000. That would be all under your control. Whereas when the regional district figures out their budget, or the hospital or the school tax, they say, pay us $1,000. We don't really care where you kind of get it from in a sense, but just you pay us the $1,000. So if you had 10 business residents, they each paid $100.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden we said, one of you is not going to have to pay taxes. That means now you pay your 100, but we're going to all have to cover for that one person. So you're now paying 110. So that kind of stretches that cost out that would have been collected by the group, or by that taxpayer would have been included. When that's excluded, we all now have to carry that cost.
Can you explain it a little differently from the perspective of, say, a building in the city would otherwise be paying RDCK taxes, and can you explain how that payment would be spread among city taxpayers versus area taxpayers? In other words, does the burden fall on the city taxpayers, or is it shared among the regional taxpayers as well?
So in most cases, what you have is we are all apportioned based on our assessed value.
Right.
So If the assessed value was all the same, that would be one thing. And again, it's the same would be for whatever area that might be collecting. They would be their assessed value. RDCK says you owe us $500. City is $1,000. Another area might be $250. So those groups in itself all have to come up within their areas with that taxation. And so a building here isn't necessarily responsible for their portion. Now, again, there can run a bit of a challenge where our assessed values go up more than other areas, which again is common even within our own tax base, where if you've had the average increase, in theory, you should be pretty even on where your tax was the year before. But say you're not, maybe you're 10% above the average increase in assessed value, you are now going to pay more in taxes than you had the year before. Someone who is below that line is going to pay less, and so that's how it again gets portioned and
Yeah.
balances out.
Yeah, okay, so then if I may, just again for my own clarity, maybe for others as well. Let's say you're building that Reimer's building or Lakeside property. They would be, based on their assessed value, they would be paying a certain amount. We as the city say, we're going to grant you a PTE. The RDCK doesn't care about that. They're going to look for the full amount.
That's correct, and the hospital. Is
And the
same
hospital
thing,
and
yeah.
the school board.
Yeah, school
So
board.
that when we offer this PTE, will that property pay those RDCK taxes, or will we have to somehow come up with the difference? Like
Right.
in terms of the city
Right.
taxpayers collectively would have to come up with the difference
Exactly.
to make up for that.
Exactly. That's where that idea of it's $1,000 requisition. And if we said now had 10 properties that were all equally valued,
Yeah.
and one dropped out or one was given a permissive taxes, then all the rest of the properties have to have that increase to be able to cover for what they would have been paying.
Yeah. So then,
Even at that, Councillor Lockenberg, earlier on when Colin was explaining this, the value of that building is probably 12 million, but now it's assessed at 3 million because of the type of,
right,
so there's less taxation. Yeah, there's less taxation. If we're better off with a $12 million
building, yeah,
building
Yeah.
than we are with a $3 million. And the other thing too that is worth noting, there's statutory tax exemptions. So most of the ones we're talking about, we're not obligated
Yeah.
to give any exemption, right? So when we go beyond the statutory ones, that's out of the will of council to pull them onto the table or to hear from people that are making that application. We're obligated to do that, but we're not obligated to give a tax exemption to them. But some properties, like churches as an example, or the provincial government buildings would be another example. They have a statutory schools, hospitals, right? So
So for anybody listening, a lot of these organizations that we're providing the PTE for are providing a service to the region.
right,
And by offering this PTE, we're asking the city taxpayers to
To carry the full
subsidize,
burden.
carry the full
Full
burden
amount.
on behalf of the whole region. So
exactly,
we really need to consider that.
exactly.
You've got it. I didn't do that better job today, did I?
And that's what's clear, and it's been, so it's helpful too, is when we have this new construction that is taxable, that taxation comes in and helps provide with the cost of service increase. So when someone has the large buildings come along and they will, require their own types of service, and we don't get any taxation on them, that also makes it challenging, because instead of expecting to have support as a taxpayer, that a new group is coming on, which will kind of help diffuse any increases in these taxes, whether they're the municipal or with the other groups. When that doesn't happen, then again, you add a bit of a burden to the tax base
Yeah.
as well.
And many people that watch some of the buildings that are built in our community will say, "Oh, that'll be good for the tax base," right? But in the case of those two buildings, the three buildings actually, they're valued at a lower rate, and we still have to supply all of the services: police, fire, water, sewer, garbage, snow plowing. We're still on the same hook
Yeah.
for twice as much property as we would be if we were getting market value out of it. It would benefit us greatly, for sure.
But we also, and I know the council is very clear, we're very pleased with BC Housing and with these organizations that are bringing this type of housing to our community. So that's,
Absolutely.
that's part of the trade that we know of.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about finding it's fairness for the residents that don't get the benefit. We're trying to find the
Right.
balance there.
Exactly.
Yeah, thanks
Thank
for
you. Okay, any,
Just sort of a follow-up to that question, if we could get some clarity around the statutory, so there have been some changes to the policy that, around capping how much is available for PTEs, for example. So if there are statutory organizations that when you say that, it sounds like we're required to give them PTEs,
right,
right? So how do we then add in considerations like we've talked about where, well, if you've had two years of benefit in PTE, then, or 2 sessions, whatever, I guess these are 3 years that we're permitting, then what happens in that priority setting of who gets PTEs? Those organizations always fall into the yes category, and then there's competition only from the new organizations?
well, there's also, Kevin, the grant and lieu.
Correct.
counts as
Yeah,
well.
so let's
So that's
just-
another piece.
Let's just stick,
different.
Yeah,
yeah,
stay with
let's
that.
just stick with the statutory, so I think it's just
Churches.
churches, and it's the footprint and the building of the church
Yeah.
is statutory exempt, so that's not, council has no say in that. But the land surrounding that footprint are not statutory exempt, so those are the ones where you would choose.
Like
whether
where the
you-
building sits is
Just the
exempt.
footprint, yeah, the building
Not
and the
the building.
footprint, but all the grounds around it, parking lots, green
And that's where the
space,
percentages that come in there, that's where we give them just that percentage.
correct, that's right.
And actually, but a very good point that I should have raised actually was one of the things that council added to the policy. And again, by that rule of thumb is as we are going forward, and we have, lots of good organizations looking for a tax, permissive tax exemption, is to consider as we get this pressure from people wanting to have them, if you've had it for a long time, whether you should have a break from having it and kind of, not just be expected to get it each year. And that was something that was built into the policy, that when we get to some of those numbers in the 3 years from now, when we look at this again, that would be something that council would consider and say, hey, maybe it's time for this group to have a break, and allow someone else to get the benefit, or just bring some of that taxation back into the city, because it can be an expensive place here in Nelson.
Thank you. Thanks, Colin. Okay, anybody else with a question? Hearing none. All in favor? Carried. And number 2, that the permissive tax exemption bylaw number 3535-2021 be read a third time by title only. Moved by Councillor Page, second by Councillor Renwick? Okay.
Sure.
Yeah. All in favor? Carried. Thanks very much.
Remember your name.
Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind, I want to talk about permissive tax exemptions, but I wanted to get these passed because we're not going to change this at this point. But I would like to talk about whether or not we could have staff, we have some that'll come back in the fall that, just because of their timeline, that we'll see this again, is whether or not, on their very long work plan, whether or not we could actually look at something where we decide to look at notice of the ending, like the withdrawal from PTEs over a period of time, as opposed to, okay, well, you've had 2 and now, which we don't have built into the policy yet. I mean, that's a policy consideration to say you can have one twice, that would be 6 years, and then you're out and somebody else is in. And I think the idea is that listening to the discussions that we have had, is that I think a majority of council, at least this council, would like to see the elimination of PTEs, but with the potential of preserving that concept of what we do have in the bylaw of 0.5% of 1%, half of a percentage point of taxation would be held aside for some fund we would yet know the name of, sustainability fund, whether we call it the Nelson Next Fund or whatever, where we would sort of hold that equivalent amount of money, and then for projects that would perhaps benefit a broader cross-section of the city than the selective PTEs do. And I would see something like, I was thinking that, the notice would be, well, just start thinking about it. To build it into your budget, we're going to take you down 10% of whatever your PTE is now for the next 10 years, but when you think about the 4-year cycle for most PTEs, that the better thing would be is that, okay, get your head wrapped around, you're gonna lose 25%, so if you have a 50% PTE, lose 25% of it over 4 years until it was gone, so that we wouldn't be in this, oh, we can't change how do we give the PTEs now because we're making the decision tomorrow, and we haven't given any time to the proponents that we heard from. So the idea would be is to give notice that there's the potential of change coming that allows all of these organizations to budget appropriately, because I think that's our biggest concern, is we don't want to lose anybody or compromise anybody's ability to do the good work that they do. My second point is that I would like us to continue as a city. This always comes, it's one of those sort of moral tough ones, is to continue to write the government about the elimination of statutory PTEs. Church and state have been long separated in this country for a long time. And I think that we need to, churches do good work, but I don't know that they're as relevant as they may have been at one time. And I think this is, eliminating statutory PTEs is something that the government is a bit nervous about doing. But I think that we still need to ask them, and perhaps even the government looks at maybe statutory PTEs for churches are only 50% of their footprint. I mean, there's lots of options that they can work on. And what I would see is that if we feel that there are churches within our community that are doing very good work, is that we can find a model, and maybe it's this other pile of money that we have, that we would help them, because I think some churches do benefit the community more, but we wouldn't be giving it to them because they're a church. We would be giving it to them because they service a broader branch
Community organization.
of the community. And have a much further reach than their congregation. So I've brought this forward, well, way back even when we were juniors, 20 years ago, about this lobby, and it does come up periodically to UBCM, and I think that we should continue to look at the reduction, at least in the statutory PTEs that the government has in place currently.
So Councillor Morrison, that's really well explained, but there's no meat on the bone. So if you want something to happen with that, you'd almost need to, formalise a motion to bring forward to council, keeping in mind that unless it's enshrined in a bylaw that's has to come to council to be changed, that would be at the prerogative of future council to decide if they wanted to support that. So if you want to prep something for the next meeting.
Yeah, I can bring something forward, but I think the other part is just like the letter to government about statutory PTEs. I think that's something that we could.
Do you want to make a motion?
I would make a motion that we write a letter to, as a motion to the UBCM about changing the statutory PTEs.
I'd second that.
Have a seconder?
Yeah.
And is this
Question?
a notice of motion, or is
After
this?
the questions.
What can be a notice of motion? Would you like a notice of motion on that?
It's
think
time to sort of look
it
into it a
does
little
give-
bit.
Council a chance to, instead of.
That's fine.
Yeah.
So notice of motion on that one, because I'm just looking
Yeah.
for a letter, because I think that the city of Nelson has written this letter before, but this is a different council, so to perhaps contemplate writing it again, and then I will talk with other staff about the other idea. I don't see that, I brought that forward just because we're talking about PTEs, it's been out there, we've had a good discussion about it, we've done a lot of work, and what happens is that we don't usually see PTEs for another 3 years, and they fall out of bed, and then there we are again. Oh, we don't really want to do it, but we can't because we're going to compromise the organization. So,
Okay, so that's a notice of motion. You need a seconder for that.
Not for notice.
Sorry, it's a notice of motion. I beg your
Yeah.
pardon.
Yeah, you don't need a seconder for that.
You don't
Just 2 notices of motion, though?
just one. You're gonna,
just one
yeah.
about the letter,
The
and
letter.
then, just to put in the staff's ear, because we are meeting about PTE again, and that might be a chance to.
So
The other one is sort of policy work, which you had that workshop earlier, so we'll add it to the list for your consideration of which ones you want us to focus
That's why I
on.
started off with saying they're already really busy.
Thank you. Councillor Page.
So through the chair to Councillor Morrison, I'm just wondering, I can see the benefit of a letter, but is this also perhaps or instead an AKBLG resolution to go to UBCM for next convention? Should this?
It could go through that way as well. So whether or not we do a direct one to UBCM or we put it through AKBLG, I mean, it's going to be a notice of motion, so I guess then we can have that discussion which
Okay.
way we want to put it through.
Okay.
It has to go through whatever channel it needs to go through.
Sure. Fair enough.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, all in favor? Carried.
There's no,
Notice
Go
motion.
for it.
Anyways.
Okay, recommendations from staff, information items, correspondence, minutes from committees and commissions. Agenda reports are up next.
I thought you said gender reports are next.
Financial reports, Rusty Moose back on there. with the-
We can't go down there.
I
I'll
just wanna,
move the reports.
and I'll second.
Second, both sets, okay.
Well, unless anyone wants to pick anything up.
And, oh, I did, well, I have something to pick out, and that's in regards to the accounts payable, list, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
And I did ask the CFO in advance of the meeting. And I was looking and I was thinking, I see all these names of all these markets I go to. And he explained to me that's because of the reimbursement for the, farm, Councillor Woodward, what are they called?
Coupon.
Coupon program, yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was just looking, and the coupon program, I guess we'll have an end of the year report, but the coupon program looks like it was very, it had a
Successful.
lot of uptake and was very successful this year. So
It was last year
looking at the
too.
accounts payable,
Did you want me to talk about it?
Yeah, go ahead.
sure.
So this was I guess what would be the word? Like
Collaboration.
Collaboration, I guess. Yeah, between the Nelson Community Food Center, the city, and the markets to produce coupons, which I think we gave out $2,500 in coupons that could be redeemed at the market for food. And so it was put one in per bag of food that went out of the food center, and then people could take that coupon down to the market and buy fresh food, local food. So it was a really nice program because it was helping people get healthy, nutritious food from local farmers, and so it was a good. I think it was the first time since I've worked at the food center. So.
It's a provincial program, isn't it?
Well, no, that's the BC Association of Farmers Markets also has a coupon program, but this was a locally derived program. So
It's worked very well.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I agree, Councillor Morrison and Council. I think it's going to be exciting to actually have a report on the market, not just the coupon program, but the overall market. It has really been a fantastic year, and our manager, Jordan Martin, has done an excellent job, and I look forward to sharing the good news with Council, and I think what the plan looks like for 2022.
Good, thank you very much. And all in favor of receipt of the reports, thank you. The notice of motion we just had, late items,
a late item.
Councillor Woodward.
Recently the RDCK had a decision on remuneration and stipends, which they decided to have some increases in that department. And I just feel like, like everywhere, this has been a really tough time for a lot of people in our region. And I would like to request that the city write a letter to the RDCK to essentially say, why would you increase the monies that you're getting when so many of the citizens in this region are struggling through this time? So that's my request, and I'm wondering if there'd be any appetite for a seconder on that.
Second.
Second by Councillor Renwick. Any questions?
Does anybody want to maybe add to that?
Councillor Lockenberg.
So, if I'm to understand correctly, and for the public's benefit, the directors have increased, and correct me, their monthly salary, yearly salary, as well as their stipend for meetings. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And how much do they increase it by?
It varies. I did send you a copy of the report, but
For the
so
public?
some committees had significant increase. Like one is the resource recovery chair stipend increased
There it is.
from $286 to $397. So over $100. Other meeting stipends increased from $156 to $191. So most committees have seen a lift. There has been some general lift in the stipends for the chair, vice chair, and the rural administration, the rural affairs chair, rural affairs chair, as well. And as is sort of standard policy, the base stipend increases the first of the year based on CPI, somewhat similar to our city council stipend that also increases yearly. But we did take a year where we didn't have the increase during COVID, but the regional district decided not to do that during these last 2 years.
So again, for clarity on that, so the regional district gets a inflation indexed adjustment, so
On top of
based on
that.
the CPI, so that's happening already. So a 33% increase, are we asking for them to explain that? Or do we have some idea of why they're looking for such a big increase? 33% in 1 year seems really dramatic. Is there any explanation of that?
No, I think the motion put forward by Councillor Woodward, perhaps we'll get an answer to some of these sort of significant increases for chairs of committees and committee spots. So
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Councillor Charwood.
For Councillor Morrison, as you sit at the table, was there clarity around why some committees were seeing increases and not others? I don't understand that.
Well,
Why there would be that
there was
disparate.
some discussion around particularly the resource recovery, which they're big budget, like resource recovery committee is a very large budget. That's, I think, Colin, that's the most expensive service that the city of Nelson is in with the regional district, second most expensive.
Recreation.
Under recreation. So, we pay a substantial amount of taxation for the management of our garbage. For those people that don't, like resource recovery, I always use loss. I think a lot of people don't know what that is. That this was a large service and that there was a lot of work. But again, it's chairing a meeting, and I think that chairing a meeting is chairing a meeting.
Are they hosting more meetings?
We meet monthly for
Resource recovery?
resource recovery. Other meetings don't meet as often, but this last year, which was new, we made the decision to meet monthly, and we have less of the individual sub-regions meeting during the course of the year.
And the increases are per meeting anyway?
Yes.
It's not a flat rate regardless?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think primarily for me, it was the idea that, it wasn't just an inflationary increase, it was quite a large jump.
Yeah.
And, I know here at the city, there's this constant struggle to try to keep the cost to a minimum for our taxpayer base. And I don't understand what's happening at the RD, why there's such huge jumps. So I think just a letter to explain what's happening.
Thank you. Councillor Page.
Thank you, Councillor Morrison, for sending around the report, which I've had a moment to take a look at, which I think is informative to the discussion. And I would just urge us a bit of caution on what we send out as a letter, given that this work was kicked off because of the tax changes that were happening with the CRA, and a third of their remunerations being no longer counted as tax-free. And that's the work that kicked this off. And much of the document or the report that I confess I've scanned, but I'm a fairly fast reader, is trying to follow in some places UBCM guidance. So I think if we were to send a letter, I would stick it to that. The biggest sense here is this isn't the time that some of these principles perhaps make sense, having some alignment with UBCM policy and how the 1.5 comes out and what the bases are. it's pretty well pointed that that's where some of these numbers have come from, and so some of the discussion needs to be around maybe perhaps what that base is. But I think if we're to have a letter, I think it has to be around COVID is not the time to be increasing these remunerations. This isn't the amount we want, but I want to be careful when we're talking to it that they've tried to accomplish some work and bring some alignment to UBCM and to deal with the fact that the tax changes have occurred. So it's all there in the report. I just think,
Just to
we don't
address
want to be
the,
too.
just if I may,
Yeah.
just to address the taxation changes. So the taxation changes affected both those people that hold positions in the regional district as well as those that hold city council positions. And that in both cases, I would just say that the base remuneration was improved in regards to that 1/3 of no longer being tax-free was accounted for in the base rate that people are getting. So that's already to a certain extent been accomplished by the fact that the base was raised initially right away, both here in the city and at the regional district. So this is sort of that subsection of meetings that suddenly have all, that also are subject to CPI increases every year, which is also a bit of an oddity in my mind, that I think a meeting is a meeting and that perhaps periodic increases are okay, but like a yearly increase on a base rate of attending a meeting seems a bit more.
Thank you. The other question for me would be, before I get to you, Councillor Lockenberg, is were comparisons used for other regional districts, how they were? That it'd be worth knowing what the answer to that question is as well. So, Councillor Lockenberg, go ahead.
This may be a question for staff or for Councillor Morrison through the chair. Two questions. Number one is what's the total amount of remuneration to directors, including stipends? Do we have any sense of that? Would be question number one.
Yeah, so the regular stipend for being elected, so like being a director, whether or not you attend any meetings, but just for being the director, is $3,457 a month.
Right. I'm trying to get a sense of the total that taxpayers pay to the board, and then recognizing
look
that
at my-
The general administration budget
Yeah,
to see
I'd have
that.
to look at the,
do we have a sense from staff what that might be?
I'll look at it.
I'm asking that question in part so if anybody's watching, they understand why we're even talking about this. This is a pretty serious tax burden on city taxpayers, the contribution to the RDCK to pay for regional directors' salaries and stipends. Am I correct in that?
so you're partially correct in that, is that out of Service 100, we pay for some of the stipends for everyone. And then, of course, meetings kind of get paid out of that service that you're in. And then there is taxation that is just, there's another service that's for the rural administration, and a big portion of the directors have their stipend taken out of that taxation that we don't contribute to. So the city of Nelson isn't in the rural administration service.
Right, but for, say, resource recovery, we would be paying those stipends because we're in that service.
Yes.
So that leads to my second question. Am I mistaken in understanding that the stipends were supposed to have gone away at some point? Like, wasn't there an increase in salaries to make the administration of stipends easier? Like, because there's an administrative overhead to manage the stipends. You have to write things down, it has to go to staff, they have to process these payments. So at one point, didn't they try to eliminate that, simplify it, increase the base to cover that?
Yeah.
Is that not correct?
That, no, I can't
Did I get that?
answer that question because, but that's my understanding.
Okay.
Whether or not that's folklore, I don't know, but that is my understanding, that at one time that the, particularly in this regional district, they increased the amount to decrease the amount of paperwork that had to be submitted every time you went to a meeting, that you weren't having to hand somebody a piece of paper that had the potential of getting lost.
Right. but then it didn't actually go.
But that might have been more the mayor's time when he
Yeah,
was
it
at
was,
that.
yeah.
Thank you, I just wanted to
And then it
understand.
eventually faded.
Could be part of the question.
Kevin?
I can answer this is based on their 2020 Statement of Financial Information. So the total payroll for directors for the year 2020 was 762,000, with expenses 804,000. So the expenses wouldn't include, I don't think it includes all the attendance at meetings, et cetera. It's their direct expenses. So, yeah, so we're,
So likely in a million.
yeah, I would say overall, the cost to, for the elected officials would be $1 million.
And like we do, the RD has to do with SOFI reports, so that is public information to look up the Regional District of Central Kootenay's SOFI report to see what salaries were and then with expenses
Okay. Thank you.
for total compensation.
Councillor Page?
Okay, thank you everyone for, a very illuminating discussion. I think it's a good one to have. I want to capture that to send a letter like this, I would like to get an answer back on what analysis the RDCK has done on their comparables to nearby, comparable regional districts and where their base is in relation to that. Because I think a lot of the underpinnings of the calculations that we are seeing are some sort of extrapolation coming off that base. And if that base is a multiple of what the Kootenay boundary over in Trail and Rossland is doing versus what the East Kootenays is doing in Cranbrook and Creston, then I think that's really where we need to focus some attention. And if our regional district is well at a step with that, then I want to focus in on that and get an answer from that board and see where they think they need to lie and why.
You getting the drift of the conversation here, Sarah? Okay. Okay, thank you. Any further questions? All in favor? Carried. Thanks very much. The next one is I'm requesting permission from council to direct staff to prepare a letter to the minister responsible for environmental protection and sustainability and also to the Department of Fisheries and Oceans requesting a current status of the fish stocks in Kootenay Lake and to provide information on any past and current and future strategies to increase the fish stock levels in Kootenay Lake. And how we arrived at that, I contacted the rural directors and rural mayors, and we had a Zoom meeting last week with Mayor Susan Hewitt, Director Gary Jackman, Director Faust, myself, and the chair of the regional district was unavailable, as was Tom Newell, but both of them are aware of what we were doing and are in favour of making contact with the ministry to get some update. There's some serious concerns about fish habitat on Kootenay Lake and the depletion in the kokanee stocks in particular, and the fact that we're currently on a program now to kill Dolly Varden and rainbow trout just to keep the kokanee stocks at some kind of reasonable level. So I think we're at a bit of a crisis point in Kootenay Lake, and we believe it's important that we let the provincial government and federal government know that there's serious concern from those that represent the people that live in and around Kootenay Lake to try and gain back control of the fish stocks and make sure that they're at a reasonable level to sustain them for future generations. So with that, I'm asking Council for permission to write that letter and have it sent out. It'll also be signed by the other directors as well and the other mayors that are included in this.
Second that?
Moved by Councillor Page and second by Councillor Morrison. Questions?
I would just like to make sure that you include, if it's going to the provincial and federal government, that you talk about climate change, because it's part of what's happening, and that it may not be the only piece in there, but I think it's an important kind of meta discussion that needs to be part of this to make sure that climate change has many, many effects, and this
Right.
is one of them, or part of one of them.
Yeah, and I think there again, there's probably a number of factors that
Yes.
are causing that. So
Yes,
we can identify, climate change is potentially one of those factors.
yes.
But I think it's important that they have a look and see what all of the factors are, but who knows really at the end of the day. But I know that in the last 10 years, they haven't really solved that problem. So I think we have a responsibility as elected officials to speak on behalf of our constituents in and around the lake to make sure it's in the best potential, the best condition it can be in to enhance that fish stock. Okay. All good?
Question.
Councillor Page?
So you're sending this off to the province. I guess I just simply, should we also send it off to the Columbia River Treaty Organization that's going through, because they're
Negotiate.
Well, I think
they're
we-
negotiating this kind of stuff now.
The consensus in the meeting was that we would start with the province, and Director Faust has taken on the responsibility of reaching out to some other groups around the lake that are, like Friends of Kootenay Lake as an example. New Rod and Gun Club as an example in Nelson. There's several other groups that have been involved in this for quite some time. The Columbia Basin Trust will be reached out at some point, the Columbia River Treaty. This is just the initial start of a conversation that we think needs to be had. And I'd be the first one to admit that I'm not sure who all has been involved in this to date, but we hope to get to the bottom of it in the next few months.
If
And
I,
at that point in time, then we can sort of consolidate things, build a committee of this particular group and sort of see if we can't move it forward.
if I may, Mayor.
Yeah.
Just in response to what Councillor Page is asking. So the fact that although Amy Watson, the chair of the regional district, wasn't at this meeting, these discussions around the fish and the water levels have been quite fluid, mind the pun, or lack of fluid. At the table, we're always getting updates at the regional district, and that being in part that Chair Watson does sit on the Columbia Treaty group. She has some input there, and she is also the local representative on the Columbia Basin Trust. So she sits as an elected political official on the trust as well. So she's very, she's got a feel for the fact that she knows that there's the problem, and so whenever there's a chance that these environmental issues I know are very near and dear to her heart, and so she makes a point of bringing them up. So although she wasn't at that meeting, I know that she would be fully supporting this, and that we have those contacts in those other areas when we have to pull the trigger on those bigger organizations, shall we say.
Okay. Great.
Thank you. All in favor? Thanks very much. Nothing from the closed meeting to release to the public.
2020 was an anomaly because of COVID.
Resolution to,
Their expenses are
sorry?
just on the remuneration. So when I looked at 2020, Sophie, it was the anomaly because of the COVID. There just weren't attending conferences. So in 2019, it was 214,000 of expenses versus 17 in 2020. So normally it's over 200,000 a year for conferences and other expenses.
You don't have a resolution, but just a report or just something
Yeah,
to say?
absolutely, yeah.
Just to let the public know that Saturday is International Repair Day. And I'd almost defer to, well, I would, if Councillor Page is interested, defer to Councillor Page to,
The repair factory, you mean?
no, well, maybe.
Plug away. Get your batteries
Okay, when
fixed.
it's yours.
Three people
One
over
up
the
by the
motion.
credit union there? The-
Yeah, the one over.
One
just
down.
over here. No, I think
Repair is in the name.
I just to let the public know that this is, it's an important part of getting a handle on climate change and waste, and we all could do probably better to extend the life of the products that we consume. Councillor Page, have anything to add?
I would only add, we've already put forward, Councillor Lautenberg has proposed, and we put forward a resolution to AKBLG and UBCM on the right to repair. And as someone who works in the industry, one of the biggest challenges that people run into is that lack of access to technical manuals, certified parts, and then design decisions that are meant to keep people out of their devices, so that whether you can't figure out what that error code on your washing machine means, or whether you can't get at the security screws to take out that battery to replace it. There's so many ways that our devices are built so they can't be repaired. However, there's also a very strong, technically capable community that's grown up around these problems, and there's lots of people fighting for the movement on this particular issue, whether it's open sourcing access to parts or open sourcing the access to information. Lots of stuff is moving, and it's a good day, Saturday, to read up a little bit more and see what's going on in your jurisdiction, in the province, in the country, because it is super important that, you know, if you've had something for 5 years and the battery's the only thing that's going wrong, that you have access to be able to change that. And that the person who's going to change that has access to a quality stream of parts, because those parts are either being provided by the vendor, or the specs for those parts have been provided to the manufacturer, or copyright controls have not put in place on silly little connectors or other little components of that, so that they can get access to the parts, that you can buy them, that you can use tools that you might find off the shelf to put them together, and that things don't need to be broken in order to get to the area where you might want to put that battery, because that's what's going to keep a lot of stuff out of landfills. It's what's going to keep stuff in your pocket, and it's what is going to keep our planet moving forward in a 21st century way.
I got a little, a small portable speaker at home that I paid a fair bit of money for, that I think was $300 or something. And it stopped charging. And you can pull the back of it, but you can't get access to the battery. So I look up on the computer, you know, it's the battery, like everybody tells you, YouTube and the whole 9 yards, but you can't get in past the,
It's like a car that doesn't it's a car you can't fill up with gas.
yeah, exactly. Councillor Renwick, you can fill us in on that right to repair. The Toyota,
Toyota with
About that, right?
welded on tires.
Don't get me going there.
okay, thanks very much.
Yep, thanks.
Thanks, Rick, for doing that. All right.
There's just
Yeah.
release
In
of
camera.
the
Camera information.
for
Yeah.
the, letter of consent for the West, West Kootenai Lake.
No, West,
West Kootenai.
That's Kootenai.
I think it's just West Kootenai Transit. West Kootenai Area Transit?
This is the West Kootenai Transit.
It's West Kootenai.
No.
Oh, it is
it's-
West Kootenai
It's
Lake
just that
Transit.
service, yeah, West
Oh, the
West Kootenai
service.
Lake Transit,
Yeah.
so
service.
transit service, okay, that council has released a resolution from in camera to approve the RDCK request for a letter of consent for bylaw 2702/2021, subject to the inclusion of apportionment and withdrawal clause either in the bylaw or as a commitment from the board.
Mover,
Move.
It's
well
already
as-
been done.
second, done?
Been done.
Just
All in
we're
favor?
just-
We're
Just
releasing
releasing
it.
it? Okay.
Yeah.
Fine. Thank you. Motion to adjourn? Nobody? Councillor Renwick, second by Councillor Woodward. All in favor? Carried. You can go home.
Wow.
Under an hour.
Under an hour.
That's why I put my hand up so quick.
I know.
50.